Welcome to the Neen Education series. In today's video, we are going to talk about active and passive voice. What is an active voice? In active voice, the subject of a sentence performs the action. Let's look at this example. Graham Bell invented the telephone. In this example, Graham Bell is the subject, invented is the verb, and the telephone is the object. Is Graham Bell is performing the action? So we can say that this is an active voice because the subject is directly involved in performing the action. As far as a passive voice is concerned, so in passive voice, the subject receives the action. We have another example. The telephone was invented by Graham Bell. In this example, the subject is receiving the action. Now let's talk about some more points. The next important information is, do all tenses have their passive voices? The answer is no. Only 8 tenses have their passive voices. They are 1. Present indefinite tense, 2. Present continuous tense, 3. Present perfect tense, 4. Past indefinite tense, 5. Past continuous tense, 6. Past perfect tense, 7. Future indefinite tense, 8. Future perfect tense. Let's talk about another point. Well, the next important information is why to use passive voice if we have active voices. The answer to this question is there are cases where only passive voice is acceptable. They are, number 1, if the subject is unknown. If we do not know about the subject who has performed the action, we'll have to use passive voice. For example, 2 chairs were broken. Now here we do not know who has performed this action. 2 chairs were broken. This is a passive structure. Number 2, if the subject is irrelevant. Now if the subject is irrelevant, for example, in this sentence, 2 buses will be provided to the school. Now we have no concerns with the person who will provide the buses. Clear? So the subject is irrelevant. In such situations, we will have to use passive voice. Number 3, when we talk about general truth. So when talking about general truth, we'll have to use passive voice. For example, rules are made to be broken. Rules are made to be broken. This is a passive structure. Now, number 4, if we want to emphasize the person or thing acted on. For example, insulin was discovered in 1921. Now, insulin is to be emphasized here. So in such kind of cases, we'll have to use passive voices. Let's talk about some more points. The next important point is, what are the general rules for passive voices? The answer to this question is, there are basically 4 rules to be followed. Number 1, change the places of subjects and objects. Number 2, auxiliary verbs are used. Number 3, after auxiliary verbs, past participle is used. Past participle means third form of the verb. Number 4, after third form of the verb, by is usually used. As we have some examples here, Graham Bell invented the telephone. In this example, Graham Bell is the subject, the telephone is the object. While applying point number 1, change the places of subjects and objects, we have got here another structure, that is passive voice. Here in this structure, we have changed the place of the object, the telephone here. Now the place has been changed, the place of the subject has been changed. So according to the first point, change the places of the subjects and objects. According to point number 2, auxiliary verbs are used. Is the active sentence is in simple past tense, so the auxiliary verb for simple past tense in passive voice is was. Now point number 2 has been applied here. Point number 3, after auxiliary verbs, past participle is used. Now after this auxiliary verb, we have used the past participle invented. Invented is the past participle of invent. Next, after past participle means after third form of the verb, by is usually used. So here you can see that by has been used here after past participle. These are the 4 general rules that are to be used in passive voices. Let's talk about some more points. Now let's talk about all these tenses one by one. Number first, we have got present indefinite tense. Present indefinite tense in its active voice and present indefinite tense in its passive voice. In active voice, the auxiliaries that are used are do and does, while in passive voice, the auxiliary verbs that are used are is, am, are. And we know that the structure of a passive voice is be plus third form of the verb. Be means is, am, are, was, were, been, being. So the structure of a passive voice is be plus third form of the verb. So here we have got is, am, are. Now let's talk about this example. Mike sells mangoes. Now sells, this is actually in simple present tense. First form of the verb with s is the subject is singular. So its passive voice is mangoes are sold by Mike, because the object that has been used here in the active voice is plural. So while applying rule number first says change the position or places of subject and objects. So while changing the places of subjects and objects, we have got an object that is in plural form. So mangoes are sold by Mike. Now its negative statement is Mike does not sell mangoes. So mangoes are not sold by Mike. This is all about simple present or present indefinite tense. Let's talk about another tense. Next tense is present continuous tense. In active voice, the auxiliary verbs that are used in present continuous tense are is, am, and are, while the auxiliary verbs that are used in present continuous tense in its passive voice are is, am, are plus being. Being should be with is, am, and are. Is being, am being, or are being. Now, for example, Mike is selling mangoes. This structure is in present continuous tense and it has been used in its active voice. Mike is selling mangoes. Once again, the object is in its plural form. So mangoes are being sold by Mike. Now let's talk about present perfect tense. In present perfect active voice, the auxiliary verbs are has, have, while in present perfect passive voice, the auxiliary verbs are has, have plus been. Now in this example, Mike has sold mangoes. This is an active voice, so its passive voice is mangoes have been sold by Mike. Let's talk about its negative sentence. Mike hasn't sold mangoes. So mangoes haven't been sold by Mike. Let's talk about another tense. Now let's talk about past tenses. In simple past or past indefinite tense, the auxiliary verb did is used, while in its passive voice, the auxiliary verbs was and were are used. Let's talk about its example. Mike sold mangoes. Its passive voice is mangoes were sold by Mike. The negative structure of Mike sold mangoes is Mike did not sell mangoes. So the passive voice of this statement is mangoes were not sold by Mike. Let's talk about past continuous tense. In past continuous tense, in its active voice, the auxiliary verbs was and were are used, while in its passive voice, the auxiliary verbs was, were plus being is used. Let's talk about its example. Mike was selling mangoes. This is in its active voice. So its passive voice is mangoes were being sold by Mike. Let's talk about the last tense in past tenses, that is past perfect tense. In past perfect tense, in its active voice, the auxiliary verb had is used, while in its passive voice, the auxiliary verb had plus been is used. Let's talk about its example. Mike had sold mangoes. This is in its active voice. So the passive voice is mangoes had been sold by Mike. This was all about past tenses. Let's talk about some more topics. Let's talk about future tenses. In future indefinite tense, in its active voice, the auxiliary verbs are will and shall, while in its passive voice, the auxiliary verbs are will, shall plus be. Let's talk about this example. Mike will sell mangoes. Its passive voice is mangoes will be sold by Mike. Now let's talk about the last tense, that is future perfect tense. In future perfect tense, in its active voice, the auxiliary verbs are will, shall plus have, while in its passive voice, the auxiliary verbs are will, shall plus have plus been. Now let's take this example. Mike will have sold mangoes. Its passive voice is mangoes will have been sold by Mike. This was all about tenses. Let's talk about some more points. Now, in the case of a modal verb, the structure will be modal verb plus be plus third form of the verb. The common modal verbs are can, could, may, might, must, etc. Now, for example, the sentence is Mike can sell mangoes. So its passive structure is mangoes can be sold by Mike. This is the passive structure. Now let's talk about another point. Finally, in the case of imperative sentences, the structure will be let plus object plus be plus third form of the verb. An imperative sentence is a sentence that shows an order, request, or an advice. Let's look at this example. Open the door. According to the structure, we have used here let the door be opened. Opened is the third form of the verb. Be is the word given in the structure. The door is the object. And let is the word given in the structure. So let plus object plus be plus third form of the verb is the structure of imperative sentence in its passive voice. I hope you have understood the topic of active and passive voice in details. If you are enjoying my videos and lectures, you are requested to subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video. Take care.